How many people actually have good relationships with their mother in law? I've often wondered about that, given my rocky relationship with my mother in law, Mary. Don't get me wrong, I never disliked Mary. In fact, I always wanted to get along with her. But from the very beginning of our marriage, Mary has been bending my intentions out of shape. My husband and I got married 4 years ago. We met through mutual friends and hit it off right away, starting to date. On our third anniversary, he proposed. He's not much of a talker, but he's always been kind and calming, a real rock for me. So when he proposed, there was no hesitation. I said yes, and we happily tied the knot. As for my father-in-law and mother-in-law, I never had any particular thoughts about them. During family meetings, our conversations were always pleasant. No snide comments or anything. I figured we'd just keep a healthy distance and get along fine. Then came our first Christmas after getting married, and that's when the drama started. At the time, I was pregnant with our daughter. While I wasn't showing much yet, I was trying to take it easy because it was my first pregnancy. But when we arrived at my in-laws' house for the holidays, Mary immediately put me to work preparing the Christmas dinner. My husband was busy drinking with my father-in-law, Bob, and didn't notice how I was being treated. Mary had me cooking, cleaning, and running around nonstop. When I tried to rest because of the baby, she would say, "What are you doing just sitting there? You need to know your place. Just because you're pregnant doesn't mean you can slack off." She would force me back to my feet and keep ordering me around. I followed all her instructions, yet the next set of orders came instantly. So much for relaxing during the holiday break. I never expected our first visit to the in-laws' house to be this exhausting. By the time we got back in the car, I was completely drained. My husband should have noticed what was happening between Mary and me, and it frustrated me that he didn't seem to care. But he had been enjoying his time talking and drinking with Bob, so maybe he just wasn't paying attention to me. I couldn't bring myself to confront him about it. After that, our daughter was born, and during the following summer, we went to my parents' house. My parents live about an hour away from our apartment, just like my in-laws, so we visit them every few months. However, Christmas at the in-laws became an annual tradition. But the pressure to visit them more often increased after our daughter was born. It might just be because they want to see her, but for me, it's been a source of stress. Every time I go to the in-laws, I know I won't be able to relax, and Mary will always have some sort of task for me. I knew all too well what I was getting into, and if it were up to me, I wouldn't have gone. But my daughter was still young, and I couldn't just leave her behind. My husband, as clueless as ever, didn't seem to notice that Mary was making my life miserable. The only one who seemed to get it was Bob, but he's practically invisible at the in-laws' house. He never says anything to Mary. Mary knows this, so she doesn't openly harass me when my husband is around. But if Bob is there, she'll make snide remarks. On top of that, she has me prepare meals and then serve them only to my husband and Bob saying, "We'll eat later. We have chores to do." Then she eats in the kitchen, leaving nothing for me. If a situation arises where we all have to sit at the table, she'll eat my portion of the side dishes and say, "Emma, you said you didn't like this, remember?" Saying so, she didn't give me a side dish. My husband will just genuinely look surprised and say, "Oh, you didn't like it?" I'm just genuinely surprised. Mary turns to him and says, "See, you have to keep track. Emma is so picky." Which is nonsense. I'm not particularly picky, and I generally eat what's given to me. But dealing with Mary's subtle harassment had started to feel tiresome. I'd only managed to eat one meal during a 2-night stay. Such things were commonplace. It had gotten so routine that I started bringing my own emergency snacks like sweetbread and cookies whenever I'd go to the in-laws' house. I would just eat them in the kitchen afterwards since no meal was prepared for me anyway. Seeing this, Mary says, "Isn't it a bit much to bring your own food? Shouldn't a daughter-in-law show some restraint?" She mocked me. But by then, I had learned to tune her out to some extent. Sure, it still irritated me, but I no longer felt like a failure as a daughter-in-law. This continued for several years after my daughter was born, and by the 5th year of our marriage, I was pregnant with our second child. We went to the in-laws' house for Christmas that year, as is customary. But for some reason, my husband was acting a bit strange this time. As soon as we arrived at the in-laws' house, Mary was on me as usual. "Emma, can you help with the Christmas dinner?" That's what I was told. Knowing that helping really meant doing it all myself, I simply said, "All right." Just then, my husband, who usually starts drinking with Bob right away, seemed to have been listening to our conversation. "No, Emma can sit. Mom, Emma is pregnant with our second child," he kindly said. Even so, when I tried to speak, my husband sharply snapped, "Just sit down," he yelled. I was shocked to see him so furious. It was unlike his usual calm demeanor. However, just as I was about to sit, Mary chimed in. "Look, things go faster when women handle these tasks. Emma helps me every month, so just sit down, okay? Come on, Emma." Unable to do anything else, I ended up being bossed around by Mary as usual. But today was different. My husband seemed off. As we headed to the kitchen, my husband followed. Upon arriving, he asked, "Mom, where's Emma going to sit? You're going to help too, right?" Mary quickly fetched a chair and set it in front of me, saying, "Here, sit down, Emma. You're pregnant after all." She was uncharacteristically kind. All the while, my husband just stood there, silently observing. Although he didn't interfere, he watched us intently. But Mary grew restless and tried to get my husband out of the room by suggesting, "Why don't you go have a drink with Dad?" My husband, however, didn't budge. Our daughter's fussing caught Mary's attention. "Listen, Betty's crying. Go soothe her." Finally, my husband left the kitchen. Immediately, Mary sighed and said, "Oh, I'm tired. Emma, just finish the rest yourself. Stand up. Pregnancy isn't an illness." She snatched the chair from me and sat down. But Mary's relief was short-lived. My husband returned carrying our daughter. Mary, caught off guard, tried to stand up and ended up falling with the chair. My husband glared at her. "Why are you sitting, Mom, while Emma is standing?" he said in a cold voice. Frantically, Mary answered, "Oh, my back just started hurting a bit. I just switched places for a second." She hurriedly returned the chair to me. Thanks to my husband's supervision, Mary actually helped with the Christmas dinner prep, and we finished in half the usual time. Still, my husband remarked, "This was much quicker than usual, even though you both should be working on this every year." He made such a mysterious comment. Mary, without replying, simply said, "I'm going to start preparing dinner. Why don't you go to the living room with Betty?" She tried to smile as she said this, but her son didn't budge an inch. Instead, he said, "Mom, why don't you want me in here? Is there something you're trying to hide?" Mary was clearly flustered, but managed to stammer, "No, not really." Then he sighed and said, "Call me if you need anything," and returned to the living room with our daughter. Once she confirmed he had left, Mary shot me a glare. "Did you say something to John?" I was equally surprised. I never thought my husband would behave like this. "I haven't said anything. I don't know what you're talking about." Exhaling a sigh, Mary said, "Fine, whatever. After dinner, you'll be cleaning upstairs. You know the drill. You do it every year." After that, I prepared dinner, and as usual, Mary served my husband, Bob, and herself first. But today was different. My husband insisted. "We won't eat until Emma joins us," thwarting Mary's plan, so we all ended up eating together. He kept adding more side dishes to my plate. Emma, you're pregnant. You need to eat well. Usually Mary would give me less food, assuming I disliked certain dishes, but she couldn't intervene this time. Emma, are you sure you like that? You don't have to force yourself to eat. She tried to snatch the dish away from me. No, Emma eats what she's given. It's better for the baby if she doesn't have food preferences, my husband said, so Mary couldn't say anything more. After dinner, I usually do the dishes by myself, but this time my husband stepped in. I'll do it today, Emma. You sit down. He grabbed the dishes from me and headed to the kitchen. Seeing this, Mary whispered, Letting John do that. You're a failure of a daughter-in-law. Go clean the upstairs. That's what she said to me in a whisper. As much as I didn't want to share a space with Mary, I was about to head upstairs when my husband stopped me. Emma, where are you going? I didn't know how to respond, and before I could say anything, he seriously asked, Did Mom tell you to do something? No. Before I could say more, he took my hand and led me back to the living room. He looked angrier than I had ever seen him before. Then, in front of Mary and Bob, he began to speak. I misunderstood because Emma didn't say anything. I thought she was getting along with Mom. Mary looked shocked at his words. What have you been doing to Emma, Mom? He asked. Looking flustered, Mary responded. What are you talking about? Emma and I get along just fine, right, Emma? She looked at me, seeking agreement. Well, about that. Before I could elaborate, my husband spoke again. Every time we come back from visiting here, I notice Emma looking down. I was concerned but didn't press because you always seem cheerful, Mom. You haven't been harassing Emma, have you? Mary's face flushed with anger. I haven't done any such thing. Emma, did you say something unnecessary? She lunged at me, but my husband intervened. Enough, he shouted. I've always been treated well by Emma's parents, so I assumed you were kind to her as well, Mom. But Emma looks miserable every time we come back here. It's true that being at my parents' house might make her feel a bit uncomfortable, but that goes both ways. Yet I have never felt unhappy when I'm at her parents' place. They're really good people. My husband's eyes were filled with tears. Seeing him like that, I couldn't help but tear up too. My husband looked at Mary, who was visibly uncomfortable, and said, Mom, can you really face Emma's parents like this? Can you honestly say you treat Emma well? Just then, Bob stood up and apologized to us. I'm sorry, Emma. I also noticed that Mary had been distant with you, but I didn't say anything. I'm equally at fault. I'm truly sorry. Hearing this, my husband turned to Mary. Mom, you should apologize to Emma too. While saying sorry won't fix everything, it's a start. But Mary wouldn't even look at me, let alone apologize. Seeing this, my husband sighed deeply and said, If that's how it's going to be, Mom, then fine. We won't be coming back to this house ever again. Mary looked shocked. That's not fair, is it? She pleaded. Ignoring her, my husband began packing our things. Mary started sobbing uncontrollably. But no one, not even Bob, comforted her. Let's go, Emma, my husband said, picking up our daughter and calling me. Mary collapsed on the floor, crying, and Bob just sat there, head down. In that awkward atmosphere, we left my in-laws' house. Ever since, Mary has tried to call my husband multiple times, but he's blocked her number. He's cut off all ties with his parents' home and hasn't been back. Instead, we've been visiting my parents more frequently. At first, my parents were puzzled by our increased visits, but they welcomed us warmly each time. My husband often says, Emma's parents are truly wonderful people. I think he feels guilty for the tough times I endured at his parents' home, but I'm not concerned anymore. I have no stress now that we've stopped going there. In the end, I owe my current happiness to my husband's actions back then. I'm truly grateful. From now on, I want to create many happy memories with my husband, our daughter, and my parents, and continue to walk a happy path in life.